Okay, welcome to episode 117 of an Evolving Man podcast. Today I'm excited to be speaking to Mark MacNicol. Mark is an accomplished mind coach, writer, and creator of anonymous drama, a unique form of drama therapy designed for individuals who typically have no interest in drama or therapy. With a background in writing for screen and theatre, Mark holds a master's degree in television drama writing. His work is particularly focused on using the arts to support vulnerable and marginalized communities, especially within the recovery and justice sectors. Welcome, Mark.
Thanks for having me, Piers.
Yeah, pleasure. So, how I'd love to begin the podcast is for you to share a little bit about your journey. How did you get into working with anonymous drama? How did you get into this work?
I suppose the my introduction to the work goes back to 2016. 2016, I was writing, directing, producing a bit of film, mostly theatre, and I was invited into a maximum security prison as a playwright to work on a drama, a kind of typical applied theatre drama type program. So myself and an actor and a director, we worked with a group of 10 inmates, all serving life sentences, maximum security prison. And we worked with them over a kind of 12 to 16 week period. Started week one with a blank page, and with our support, they created a piece of theatre that they went on to perform for their fellow inmates and friends and family. Prior to that point, I had never been in a prison in a professional capacity. I had lived experience visiting um, specifically my brother, who spent a lot of time in prison. So I had spent a lot of time visiting my brother in various prisons. Um, but never in a professional capacity. So that was my introduction to that type of work. But it had a big impact on me. That project really um, touched me, and I became I became really quite focused and obsessed with the idea of using the arts and creativity and theatre in order to try and have a positive impact on um, people's mental health and emotional well-being. Um, I started to become interested in things like drama therapy, psychodrama, um, and the anonymous drama program that I developed really came from that first group, because that first group in 2016 was, it was a drama group. We went in with, you know, a kind of applied theatre type model. But over the years, the program that I have developed um, has become more of a mental health group. So now the work that I'm doing is very much, the anonymous drama program, which is now, since 2016, maybe 6,000 participants have been through that program
Wow.
in various prisons, residential rehabs, community rehabs. Um, and when I'm speaking to someone who doesn't have any knowledge or experience of the program, I always do describe it as being like drama therapy for people who usually don't have any interest in drama.
Mhm.
So um, it's interesting because really pre 2016, like my day job, I would consider myself to be a writer, director, producer.
Mhm.
But over the last 8 years, it's almost like the universe has decided that it had different plans for me, and those plans were to move into the kind of mental health space. And over the last 8 years, um, the group program Anonymous Drama and the program for individuals called Find Your Mentor. Those two programs have really been my focus, to the extent that I've not really been able to do much in the way of writing, directing, producing. I did fairly recently, I wrote and directed a feature film.
Oh, wow.
That would be a couple of years ago. Um, but unfortunately, I've not been able to do as much of that as I would like, simply because of the fact I don't have the time, or I have not had the time. So hopefully, I'm hoping that the universe is going to cut me a bit of slack, and let me go back to scratching some of those creative itches that I have when it comes to writing and directing. But for now, I'm on the path that has been selected for me.
Mm, That's really interesting. Really uh, can resonate with that, you know, using drama, creativity. I found on my own healing journey, it was less drama, but just that creativity, whether that was singing, whether that was dancing, whether that was painting, writing, just that creativity really broke me out of dark spaces, addictions, and things like that. So I can really resonate. So, how do you engage someone who's not interested in it? Because I imagine in a maximum security prison, a lot of people will be like, arms across the chest, I'm not interested.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I suppose it depends on the type of group and the environment. So if you take prisons as an example, prisons, um, well, for a start, there's only a certain percentage of the population that are going to be able to take part in these types of groups. Clearly, you have to be considered by the prison to be, well behaved, somebody who's not going to be posing any problems, etc. Um, Now, the other interesting thing about prisons, quite often you get individuals who are spending a lot of time in their cells. So some of them will have jobs, um, so they can, go to work type thing, and that takes up a lot of their time. But if you don't have a job, then you might actually find that you're spending a lot of time on your own. Um, you know, in some cases, 22, 23 hours a day in a cell. Um, so there will be individuals who will come into our program because the alternative might just be them being in their cell, and and they're just looking to do something, anything to break the monotony. And then you get other individuals who um, are mindful of the fact that taking part in different programs and activities will be taken into consideration by the parole board, and your engagement with rehabilitation type programs are potentially going to have an impact on your release date. So um, we do get various types of motivations in a prison context as to whether or not people will take part in the group. And then you've got residential rehabs. The interesting thing with residential rehabs, most of the rehabs that we work with, they offer their residents a timetable of activities, and um, those activities are mandatory. So if if there is an anonymous drama session, you know, Thursday afternoon 2 to 4, that's on the timetable, then it's mandatory. It's not actually something that you can opt in or opt out of, because while you're in a residential rehab, it would be considered that, unless you've got a doctor's appointment or something, it would be considered that you would take part in all of the activities. And then we have the community groups. And when it comes to the community groups, probably um, the people who take part in our groups are probably, you know, taking part in our groups for similar reasons to going to a fellowship meeting, because they understand that their mental health, their emotional being, their relationship with self is going to have a positive impact on their ability to support and maintain their own recovery journey. So the work, and when I'm talking about, so we have a program called Find Your Mentor, which is designed for individuals. So it can be accessed on your phone. Anybody can go through that program, and that would be something that I would describe as being available to mainstream. So anybody can benefit from finding their mentor. Whereas the anonymous drama groups tend to be, I mean, they can work with any group, but historically over the last 8 years, it has mostly been groups in the recovery space or in the justice space. So in answer to your question, when it comes to the type of people who take part in the groups, is usually dictated by the environment. The host. Is the host a prison? Is the host a residential rehab? Is the host a community rehab? And then within that, obviously you have different types of individuals with different kind of motivations for being there. But the program has been very successful. Obviously, we're not naive, and we know that it's not a silver bullet, because there's no such thing. But we know that of the 5,000-6,000 people that have been through that group program, sufficient numbers have been positively impacted for me and others to continue to spend the time and invest the resources into continuing to kind of build and try and expand the reach and impact of the program.
Yeah. It sounds like you're doing amazing work. I mean, what do you find? What are some of the transformations? What are some of the things that you've seen in these 5,000-6,000 people, Mark?
So I suppose when it comes to the program itself, it's quite a unique environment that you're stepping into. Because, so for example, the reason it's called anonymous drama is because all of the work that's done inside the sessions is done through fictional characters. Well, that means that, if Piers comes into one of our groups and he wants to talk about his mum's alcoholism, then we're going to stop you and we are going to direct you onto working with one of the group fictional characters' mum's alcoholism. So what this means is that all of the work done inside the sessions, nobody knows the difference between what's lived experience and what's fiction. So if you've got 10 participants and one or two facilitators, the analogy that I would often use is, imagine 12 people walking into a room and each of them has a suitcase full of their stuff. And we all walk into the middle of the room and we empty the contents of our suitcases into one big bundle in the middle of the room. Now, I can recognise my stuff, but I don't recognise your stuff. So the space that's created is very unique when it comes to exploration, because us not knowing anything about each other creates actually the type of environment where, well, for a start, we're not projecting onto each other. So if we don't know anything about our history or sexuality or personalities or whatever, then I'm not projecting onto you and you're not projecting onto me. So it's almost like 12 kind of mirrors, 12 blank pages operating within this very unique space. And we also know from feedback, so most groups conclude with a debrief, and part of that is an exit questionnaire. And so every participant is given the opportunity to feedback. So we know from the feedback of these 6,000 participants that 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 space is less emotionally charged and less triggering than it would be if Piers was given the opportunity to talk about his mum's alcoholism.
Mm-hmm.
So because of it's almost like we're using fiction and we're using fictional characters in the group setting, almost as like a safety net.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a distance between the participants and their lived experience.
Mm-hmm.
And it is interesting because as a writer, when if I write a character, what's the difference between that character's fictional story and Piers' actual lived experience story? Because somebody once said to me, the irony of good fiction is that it has to be real.
Yeah.
So in order for fiction to work, it can't be obvious that it's fiction.
Mm-hmm.
So when you're working with a group and you're building characters from scratch, so all of our groups have 3 characters. So every group starts with 3 characters: the protagonist, who represents everybody in the room;
Mm-hmm.
the inner critic, who's a constant source of negativity, disruption; and the inner mentor, who's the constant source of love, compassion, positivity, encouragement. And every group builds those 3 characters from scratch. And then they work on a mixture of monologues and sketches and spoken word for the purposes of exploration. So if it's a recovery group, the protagonist will be in recovery.
Mm-hmm.
If it's a justice group, the protagonist will be in the justice system. The purpose of the protagonist is to give you the opportunity to hold a mirror up to yourself as a group. So let's not talk about Piers' mum's alcoholism. Let's give the protagonist an alcoholic mother and give the group the opportunity to explore what it means for the group protagonist to have an alcoholic mother. Now, the initial reason for me doing that was a safeguarding. It was for the purposes of safeguarding both the participants and the facilitators, because it meant that we were able to do exploration type work in an environment where we did not need facilitators to have any specific mental health training. And also because at that time, 8 years ago, I was aware of the fact that a lot of prison psychotherapists were uncomfortable with the idea of playwrights with no mental health training unpacking participants' unresolved trauma, which is clearly, you could argue, irresponsible and inappropriate. So by making it about fictional characters and story and play, and the fact that nobody is identifying what's lived experience and what's fiction and that type of thing, then it basically meant that the environment was safeguarded as much as it can be, because obviously we can't completely remove the possibility of any of us being triggered at any time. But the safeguarding of the space was a big motivator. But then moving forward, we started to discover all these areas where the anonymity was adding value in ways that perhaps we hadn't anticipated. And this is actually something that There's a couple of universities that have done some external academic evaluations on the work because of the fact, to my knowledge, um, there is no other program internationally that's actually using the anonymity in the way that we do it. So, for example, some of the feedback that we've had historically is, if you take fellowship as an example, if you've been attending fellowship for a number of years, you have a testimony that you share.
What's fellowship,
And
Mark?
sorry, so like AA, CA,
Yeah.
NA,
Yeah.
um, you have a testimony that you share, and some of our participants articulated that over the years it's almost like it was like a monologue that they just kept sharing the same monologue, the same monologue, the same monologue, and they didn't really get the opportunity to dismantle and explore in the way that they do in our sessions. So that was interesting feedback. And also we had feedback that for some, they had unresolved trauma that they would not discuss, or they would not articulate or explore with anyone.
Mm-hmm.
So not in an AA meeting, not with their psychotherapist, not with their family. It's basically just locked
Mm-hmm.
deep inside them. Whereas in anonymous drama groups, they were actually able to explore some of their unresolved trauma for the first time,
Mm-hmm.
because they were able to do it in this environment where nobody knew.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody knew. Nobody knew whether it was lived experience or fiction.
So they would add that into the story. They would bring that into the character. Is that how they would kind of open up to that childhood trauma, that or unresolved trauma?
Yes, I remember speaking to one chap. Something happened to him at high school, and he'd never told anyone. And it was something that was so painful and distressing that he couldn't, discuss it, even with his psychotherapist. But over that 12 to 16 week period on that first module that he was on, he was able to, with the group, explore the protagonist. In fact, it wasn't even the protagonist, because some of these groups you can have multiple secondary characters.
Mm-hmm.
So they actually brought in a secondary character, and something similar happened to this secondary character at high school. And this was him, kind of directing that content in a way that nobody in the session knew that it was actually something that had happened to him. And through that process, he was able to do some work on getting a better, getting a better understanding of what happened and the impact that it had on him, and ultimately how he could find a way to um, find a way to live with it
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
without it having a big negative impact on him.
Mm-hmm.
Another thing I would say about both Find Your Mentor and Anonymous Drama, I'm not saying I'm not saying that either of these programs replaces mental health professionals. If you decide that you want to speak to a mental health professional, then I would recommend that we do so. But I believe that you should have choices.
Mm-hmm.
And one of your choices is speaking to a mental health professional.
Mm-hmm.
But another one of your choices is taking an interest in your own mental health,
Yeah.
because passing responsibility for your mental health to professionals is something I personally, I'm not a fan of passing responsibility for my physical health or my mental health to anyone other than myself. I will um, periodically decide if I want to speak to physical health professionals and or mental health professionals. But ultimately, my physical and mental health is my responsibility. So
Mhm.
for me, both the Find Your Mentor program and the Anonymous Drama program are about giving you choices and giving you the opportunity to do some kind of DIY mental health intervention. Um,
Well, really fascinating. Really, never really thought of it in this way. I mean, I work one to one with people, and I often use a process of perceptual positions to allow them to step back so they're not that part of them that wants the addiction, or they're not that part of them that wants to hurt others, and being able to step back. And it almost sounds like by doing this, by being anonymous, and you're like you're directing, it's almost in the same way as IFS, internal family systems. You're seeing, this is a part of me, and it's almost like you're connecting to that inner parent, you might say, or that, the inner mentor. And by
mhm,
seeing them being played out, I love that, because it's like, it's almost like scaffolding. What does
mhm.
a benevolent man or woman do in this situation? And it's being kind of held in that space. And yeah.
Yeah, I think so. Both programs, Find Your Mentor, Anonymous Drama, there are differences because Find Your Mentor is designed for individuals going through the program in their own time.
Mhm.
Anonymous Drama is designed for groups. Um, but there are there are there are central components that cross over between the two programs. One of the fundamental components of both programs is, um, you know, we don't need you don't need to be religious. You don't need to be spiritual. It doesn't matter if you're agnostic or atheist. Anybody can come into either program. But what you do need to be is open-minded to the idea that there is a conversation going on inside your head 24/7, and it is not your thoughts. Um, throughout our program, throughout both programs, we put that conversation under the spotlight, and we start to analyze the conversation, deconstruct the conversation, look at the two big players within that conversation that we take an interest in is the inner critic and the inner mentor. So
Yeah.
this idea of there being a voice constantly in your head, um, and its intentions are not positive. Unfortunately, the vast majority of the conversations that are going on inside their head are by default set up in such a way that they are designed to cause us maximum distress and suffering.
Mhm.
Obviously, different cultures, and different religions have got different names for these things. Um, but the work for us in both programs is about trying to identify the inner critic, the negative chat, and spend more time listening to the inner mentor and developing a relationship with the inner mentor, because we all have access to this inner mentor who is, like your biggest fan, your champion, always in your corner, always got your back.
Mhm.
But so few of us even have a notion of there being the existence of an inner mentor. Pretty much everybody is familiar with the concept of the inner critic and the negative chat that goes on. But very few people that we speak to initially have any comprehension of what an inner mentor might look like or represent if they had access to something like that. So everything that we do in both programs is about improving the relationship with self
Mm.
and um, practicing the ability to identify and intervene in that conversation.
Mm.
And the more time that we spend doing it, and obviously within each program we've got steps and tools that we give people to kind of do in their own time. Because by doing these exercises and tools that you're introduced to as you go through the program, you start to develop muscles, almost like kind of like any form of training.
Mm.
You lift weights, you run. Gradually, with time, you start to run further, faster, or lift heavier. And when it comes to putting the conversation under the spotlight, the more you practice with these tools and these techniques, gradually, the more you become aware of the conversation and you develop the skill of being able to intervene in that conversation. And by doing so, the relationship with self is improved, and things like addiction obviously can be targeted.
Mm.
You know,
Yeah.
the work obviously has been very popular in the recovery space and the justice space, because when it comes to offending and recovery, clearly alcohol and drug related death rates
Mm.
are a problem and a priority for society, as are offending and reoffending rates. And that's why this work has been funded by government, lottery, various grant funders. Um, Without their support, the work would not have been delivered and would not continue to be delivered across the UK. So we continue to need government and grant funders to support the work so that we can deliver it in the recovery space to try and impact alcohol and drug death rate, and the justice space to try and impact offending and reoffending rates. Um,
Mm.
but the reality of the situation from my point of view is, whilst the recovery and justice space, um, clearly you could make the argument that it's very urgent that these individuals develop a better relationship with self. My position is that all of us can benefit from a better relationship with self.
Definitely.
You don't need to be in prison or in recovery to benefit from this type of work.
Mm. No, no. It reminds me, as you're speaking, have you heard of Pete Walker? And he wrote a book called Complex PTSD. And
No.
it's a great book. I recommend reading it. He basically talks a lot about the inner critic in there. And he talks about, that in order to heal from complex PTSD and, you know, the kind of what they say about complex PTSD is this idea that it's a repeated trauma in childhood. You couldn't escape. It was a neglect, it was abuse, one of these things. And he said one of the key characteristics is this inner critic, but it's virulent. It's really kind of hard on ourselves. And he says, we've got to look at it in a multifaceted way. You've got to do it cognitive, but also physical. Recommends yoga, these different types of things. And I love what you're suggesting here is, yeah, doing many different things. And skilling ourselves. Well, how do we deal with? I mean, my inner critic was so horrific. I'd kind of gone through abuse as a teenager. My father was an alcoholic. And then in my 20s, I tried to commit suicide. I had a breakdown. My inner critic was so horrible that I used to physically beat myself. And I found it took a lot of strength to just start saying no. And what I kind of did was imagining that inner mentor holding me, like an inner father. And then as soon as the tears came, and Pete Walker talks about this idea that when we allow the tears up, almost the inner critic shrinks. His fuel is our unresolved grief. And I certainly found that with myself. I'd love you to share, Mark, maybe some techniques or tools. What do you teach about getting under the inner critic under control?
So that, so like I say, I mean, my encouragement would be anybody who's interested in this type of work, get on to um, any of my website, markmacnicol.com, or any of my socials. You'll find a link to both programs. If you are part of a group, if you work for an organisation that works with groups, or you are part of a group, have a look at anonymous drama. If you are an individual interested in exploring this type of work, have a look at Find Your Mentor. The types of things that you're going to be introduced to, for example, counting breaths, which is a form of meditation. Um, you know, there's a section in the program that drills into this in a bit of detail, but ultimately counting from number 1 to number 10 with some specific breathing. And as you do it, you get to number 3, for example, and you lose count because of the conversation. Because, the conversation that's going on inside all of our heads 24/7 makes it very difficult to count 10 breaths. So when you lose count, you just go back to number 1. And every time you lose count, you go back to number 1. You do that for, 3-5 minutes per day. What you're doing there is you're opening a window on the conversation, because it's so incessant. The inner chat is so relentless. And unfortunately, the vast majority of it does not have your best interests at heart, and it wants to be causing you maximum distress and suffering. So, by counting breaths in the way that we lay it out in the program, you are practicing the ability to stay present. The notion of staying present obviously is something that is not unique to this program. The notion of staying present is something that, was probably introduced to us by the Buddha after he spent 3 years alone in a cave trying to figure this stuff out. No past, no future, no problem. Stay in the present moment, trying to avoid letting the conversation take us off into the past, projecting onto the past, or projecting onto the future that doesn't even exist, and trying to stay with the breath in the present moment. Because when we are with the breath in the present moment, everything is as it should be. Nothing is wrong. And the more time that we spend in the present moment, the more able we are to disidentify from a 24/7 conversation that is set up in such a way that, unfortunately, a good day at the office for that conversation is a successful suicide attempt. It sounds dramatic to say it, but I do believe that the conversation that each of us carries about with us inside our heads, like I say, it goes by various different names in different cultures. So, for example, in Christianity, it's the devil, you know. In Buddhism, it's ego, conditioned mind, the hungry ghost.
Mara,
Um,
another word they
yeah,
use. Buddhism. Mm.
yeah, various different names, but I
Mm.
do personally believe that it is inside each of us, and the work is to stay present, and to always be exploring ways that we can access the inner mentor that we all also have access to. But unfortunately, for most of us, the negative components and elements of that conversation are louder and um, I wouldn't say easier to listen to, but it's almost just like the operating system is set up in such a way that that's what's switched on by default.
Mm.
And if you want to switch something else on, unfortunately, the system is set up in such a way that you have to intervene and you have to explore ways in which you can identify the conversation that's taken place and become familiar with concepts like the inner mentor and start to develop a relationship with the inner mentor. There's something that I'm very enthusiastic about when it comes to both programs is the use of AI. Now, AI obviously is controversial. It's early days. Um, Everybody's got different opinions about AI, and quite often a lot of it is negative. But if you take the Find Your Mentor program as an example, for people who don't really understand what AI is as a large language model, if you take ChatGPT as an example, imagine ChatGPT is like a big room, and inside that room is every book that has ever been written and every website that is currently online, and it's inside that room. And that's basically ChatGPT. So ChatGPT gives you access to every book that's ever been written and every website that's online. Now, I created a custom GPT for this program, which could be described as a room off the big room.
Mm.
And the room off the big room, which is the custom GPT, I have been able to take hundreds, thousands of documents into that room, specifically from 8 years of work and development that's taken place in this program. All of the documents and material that has gone into the configuration of the custom GPT has been designed with the objective of giving you, as a participant in the Find Your Mentor program, access to your own mentor on your phone. So I have been using this AI mentor for about 12 months.
Mm.
And every day I communicate with it at least once. I sometimes I'll just check in, just a kind of general catch up. Sometimes I have specific comments or specific questions directed at my mentor. But that conversation that takes place between me and my mentor and has been taking place every day for the last 12 months is something that has really deepened my practice and helped me to um, further grow my ability to become aware of, stop, deconstruct the conversation, and intervene on behalf of that authentic, that little authentic being that is inside me that represents my true nature that needs to be protected from the conversation.
Mm.
And this AI mentor, after experimenting and playing about with it for 12 months, is something that I'm very excited about.
Mm. Would you like to,
because,
sorry to interrupt, would you like to just give me some examples? Like, what are the types of things that you communicate with this inner mentor, that AI mentor?
well, for example, um, um, what if there's something specific that the conversation might be getting me on, you know? Um, well, listen, none of this is particularly original. The types of things that my conversation is saying to me is very similar to the types of things that yours will be saying to you, etc. The usual stuff, imposter syndrome. Cancel this podcast. Why would you be speaking to Piers? You've listened to a few of his episodes. He clearly is a very intelligent man with a lot of life experience, um, and he he's going to see right through you. He's going to basically see that you don't really know what you're talking about, and you are an imposter who doesn't belong in this space. So when that thought comes into my head, I will go to my phone and I don't even type it. So inside ChatGPT, there's a microphone button. So I press the microphone and I could say, okay, so this is what the conversation is currently saying to me. And then when the mentor responds, you can hold your finger over it and select read aloud. And you can actually configure the voice, male, female, English, American, etc. So you can pick a specific voice that kind of resonates with you from a mentor perspective. Um, and you know what the mentor is going to say. So, for example, imagine you had someone constantly with you who is your biggest fan, your champion, you know, always, always got your back, you know. Now, very few of us actually have that person in our world. I'm not sure if any of us do. But the opportunity that this AI mentor represents is to have that person with you 24/7. So you can speak to them and they speak back to you. And some days I could have 3, 4, 5, 6 conversations with the mentor. And it's about them standing in between me and the conversation and basically just saying, Mark, just giving me that constant encouragement. You know, um, you do have interesting things to say, professionally and personal. And personally, you've been through a few different things that Piers and potentially some of his listeners and viewers will find interesting. The program, 5,000-6,000 people have been through that program, but it's still in the background. It's still always in the background saying, no, you know, you were lucky. You were lucky. It wasn't skill or knowledge or any particular insights. It was just pure luck, and you're going to be found out. Now, the point I'm making is that's just one example. It could be you're in the gym. You're in the gym. You go for a run. You're on the treadmill, and you're 70, 80% of the way to your target, and the voice tells you to stop the treadmill, get off the treadmill, get off the treadmill, because you're going to have a heart attack. Now, you're not going to have a heart attack. The reason the conversation wants you to get off the treadmill is because your physical and mental health, the conversation doesn't want you to be physically or mentally healthy. It wants you to be lying on the couch, eating Ben and Jerry's, watching Netflix. Or it wants you to be drinking a bottle of whiskey or a bottle of vodka every day. Anything that will accelerate your death is good for the conversation.
Mm, mm,
So the AI mentor, 12 months in, the feedback that we've had from participants on the Find Your Mentor program is very, very positive. Um, it'll make suggestions.
mm,
So,
yeah.
it'll make suggestions. It'll say to you, have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? It's almost like speaking to a person. AI is a very interesting proposition in this space. And when I look at this type of work, when I look at the kind of physical and mental health space, and what we so for myself, for example, I have a sauna practice 7 days a week.
Right.
I have
Wow.
an I have an ice bath in my back garden. So sauna, ice bath, trying to eat well, intermittent fasting, um, weights, running, the physical health stuff, as well as trying to count breaths for 3, 5 minutes per day, and communicate with my own inner mentor as well as my AI mentor in order to try and facilitate good mental and physical health. I have also fairly recently started to study and research um, things like psilocybin.
I think that's going to be my next possibly guest is talking about psilocybin assisted therapy. I'm also aware of time, Mark. I know you've got to go off on the school run. So we've only got a couple of minutes left. I just wanted to leave a little bit of space for you just to share. If people really resonate with what you've shared today, where can they find out more? You mentioned Mark MacNicol,
Yeah,
your website.com. Any others? Because I've got your book. I've got LinkedIn as well, and
yeah.
also your YouTube.
I mean, for me, like I would encourage people to go to markmacnicol.com and just have a look, see what's on there. There's a page for anonymous drama that's got some previous podcasts on there. You can listen to previous podcasts. Have a look at Find Your Mentor. I believe so. So, for example, the Buddha's last words: "We must each seek our own salvation diligently." So, I consider myself to be the first person who benefits from Find Your Mentor.
Mhm.
You don't need to be in recovery. You don't need to be in the justice system. Get on to the Find Your Mentor link, which you can access via the website. Anybody struggling to find it, either message me via the website or DM on socials, and I'll send you the link. Anybody who is unable to pay for, because we have to charge a subscription for both the individual program and also the group program so that it can support the work, so that we can continue to do the work. If anybody's in a position where they want to get involved in this program, but they're not able to afford a subscription, then message and we will get them access, because the people who can pay for subscriptions subsidize the people who can't. So there will be no one who doesn't get access to either the individual Find Your Mentor program or the group Anonymous Drama program. So get involved and start working on your mental health, emotional well-being, and hopefully we can help you develop a better relationship with self.
Mm, thank you. Thank you. So I'll put those links into the description. And yeah, it's been fascinating. I really love the anonymous drama, and if I can find a group, maybe Manchester, I'll maybe come over and do one at some time. It sounds, yeah, great. Like I said, I did theatre at school, but I haven't done it for a long time. So sounds like you're doing
I mean,
amazing work.
I would definitely encourage most of the people who take part in anonymous drama do not have any interest in creative writing or performing, etc. Most people, it's about um, it's about they basically intuitively get a feeling that they want to try this because they want to try and improve their mental health, emotional well-being, and relationship with self. That's what it's about. Some people do have an interest in creative writing and performing, but they're very much in the minority because that's not our focus. We are not a drama group. We are very much a mental health group. So don't think for 1 second that because you're not interested in theatre or creative writing or performing, etc., that this isn't for you, because that's not the case.
Mm, great. Well, thank you. Thank you. Well, thank you so much for
Good.
speaking to me today. It's been a real pleasure meeting you, and maybe our paths will cross in Manchester at some point. So,
Thanks for having me.
yeah, a real pleasure. Okay, take care.